The mechanic found it on a Tuesday. He called it deliberate. He used that word specifically, not where, not a coincidence, not one of those things. He said the brake line had been partially severed in a way that would hold until the highway, and then it wouldn't. The will reading was scheduled for that Thursday at 9 a.m. I am a licensed forensic accountant. I have spent 14 years reconstructing what money did when people thought no one was watching. I find the thing that doesn't add up. I follow it backward. I find where it started. That is what I did. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. My name is Miriam and I want to tell you about what was in that will, and what was waiting for them when I walked in that room. I count things for a living. I count the gap between what the ledger says and what the bank says. I count the days between a transaction and a signature. I count the number of times a number appears in a document where it should appear only once. I have been doing this since I was 24 years old, working audit in a downtown firm so gray and quiet it felt like the inside of a filing cabinet. I liked it. I liked the certainty of it. A number either matches or it doesn't. My name is Miriam Calloway. I was adopted at age 6 by Gerald and Patricia Whitmore. They were in their late 30s when they took me in, Gerald an insurance claims manager, Patricia a substitute teacher who eventually stopped substituting. I was their only adopted child. They already had 2 biological children. Derek, who was 9 when I arrived, and Cynthia, who was 11. The house on Pryor Street smelled like lemon furniture polish and Sunday pot roast. Patricia kept the blinds tilted up so the light came in but you couldn't see directly in from the street. Gerald watched the evening news at 6 and the late news at 11 and never missed either. Derek had a collection of model cars on a shelf above his bed that he was not allowed to touch because Patricia had arranged them by color. Cynthia had a poster of a horse on her bedroom door, and used her allowance to take riding lessons on the first Saturday of every month. I had a narrow room at the end of the hallway with a white dresser that had belonged to someone else before me. I kept it very clean. I will tell you what the arithmetic of that house looked like now that I can see it clearly. I was the child who proved Gerald and Patricia were generous people. I was the proof of their goodness, kept in the narrow room, brought out when the church group came for dinner. I was useful in the way a line item is useful. I made the budget look balanced in places where it wasn't. I was not unloved. I want to be careful about that. But love in that house was structured the way Gerald structured his claims work. There was the standard coverage and there was the supplemental coverage and they were not the same thing. Derek and Cynthia had the supplemental coverage. I had never let myself say that out loud before the week all of this happened. There is something about a break line that clarifies things. My grandmother's name was Esther Calloway. She was my biological grandmother, my birth mother's mother, and the reason I had any connection at all to a family that was actually mine. She had tracked Gerald and Patricia down 2 years after my adoption, when I was 8 years old, and asked if she could be in my life. Patricia had agreed, grudgingly, the way you agree to something you can't technically refuse without looking bad. Esther came to birthdays. She sent cards with $20 bills that Patricia always made me put in my savings account. An account I never once saw a statement for. She called me on Sunday afternoons and we talked about school, and she taught me to play gin rummy over the phone, walking me through the cards the way a coach walks a player through a playbook. When I was 16, Esther sat me down at her kitchen table, the yellow Formica one with the chip in the left corner, and said, "I want you to know that this family has money, and someday some of it will be yours." I had told no one she said that. Not Gerald, not Patricia, not Derek, not Cynthia. I stored it the way I stored everything important. Quietly in a place no one else could access. Esther Calloway died on a Friday in October, age 81, of congestive heart failure. She went in the morning before the sun was all the way up. The hospice nurse called me at 6:47 a.m. I was at her bedside the night before. I had been there 3 nights running, sleeping in the chair beside her bed, going home only to shower and change. Gerald had called once to ask how much longer this was likely to take. Patricia had sent flowers to the hospice facility with a card that said our thoughts are with the family. As if I were not family. As if she were sending them to strangers. Derek and Cynthia did not come at all. I have a photograph from that last night. Esther's hand in mine. The timestamp on that photo reads October 14th, 11:52 p.m. I looked at it often in the days that followed. I still do. The will reading was scheduled for 10 days after her death. I drove to the attorney's office for the initial informational meeting on October 17th. This was not the reading itself. It was the preliminary meeting where the executor, a woman named Joanna Farrell, walked the family through what to expect. Esther had a modest estate by most standards. A house, 2 investment accounts, a small life insurance policy. Joanna Farrell was thorough and precise and looked at all of us with the flat professional attention of someone who had sat in this room with many families. Derek leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed and his feet slightly too far forward. The posture of a man who has already mentally spent money he hasn't received. Cynthia kept glancing at her phone. Patricia sat with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw set at a slight upward angle, the expression she wore when she was confident about something. Gerald was not there. He had passed 3 years earlier, a heart attack, quick in the driveway. Patricia spoke first, before Joanna Farrell had finished. She said, "Esther always said this family would be taken care of. All of us." She understood what family meant. Joanna Farrell said the full reading would take place in 10 days. I drove home and took out a notepad and wrote down the date. October 27th, 9 a.m. On October 25th, a Monday, I dropped my car at the shop for a routine oil change. The mechanic, a man named Ruben who had been working on my car for 6 years, called me 2 hours later and asked me to come in. He showed me the brake line. He walked me through it in technical language and then, when I didn't say anything, he said it again in plain language. Someone had cut it most of the way through. Not all the way, not enough to fail in the parking lot. Enough to fail on the highway. Enough to fail at speed. He said, "Miriam, I have to ask, is there anyone who had access to your car in the last week?" I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. The week before, I had gone to Patricia's house for Sunday dinner. Derek and his girlfriend had been there. Cynthia had stopped by. My car had been in the driveway for 2 hours. I said, "Yes." I said, "Don't touch anything else. I need you to write down exactly what you found and when." He did. I have that document. I photographed the brake line myself, 6 photographs from 3 different angles, while Ruben stood beside me and didn't say a word. I drove home in Ruben's truck. I sat at my kitchen table with those photographs on my laptop screen and I looked at them for a long time. I did not cry. My hands were very steady. I noticed that about myself in high-stakes moments, my hands go still. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it October 27th. I put the photographs in it. Then I made a phone call. Joanna Farrell had given me her direct line at the preliminary meeting, which I had noted and kept. I called it the next morning, October 26th at 8 a.m. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I needed to know. Not the brake line, not yet. I asked her a simple question about the structure of the estate. Whether the will contained provisions that were contingent on any particular condition. Whether anything about my status as a beneficiary was tied to the adoption. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Miss Calloway, I really can't discuss the specific provisions until the formal reading." I said, "I understand. I'll see you tomorrow." I sat down with my coffee and I thought about what Esther had said to me at the yellow Formica table when I was 16. Then I thought about something else. Esther had sent me a letter 6 weeks before she died. A handwritten letter, 3 pages, on her ivory stationery with a small blue border. She had been declining fast by then. Her handwriting was slower than usual, more deliberate, as if she had pressed down hard on purpose. The letter was about her life. About her daughter, my birth mother, who had died when I was 4. About the things she wished she had done differently. And at the end she had written one paragraph that I had read probably 40 times since receiving it. She had written, "I made sure of the paperwork, Miriam. You were always mine. I just needed time to make the law agree with what I already knew." I had not been certain what that meant when I first read it. I thought I was beginning to understand. I called my attorney. A woman named Rosalind Chan, who had handled my estate planning for 5 years, and I told her everything. The letter, the preliminary meeting, the break line. She was quiet for 6 full seconds. Then she said, "I'll be there tomorrow." If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon for a hospital room suddenly find all the time in the world when there's a number attached to an address, you already know what tomorrow looked like. Stay with me. Patricia called me at 7:15 p.m. on October 26th, the night before the reading. She said she wanted to make sure I was all right. She said she knew losing Esther was difficult. She said Esther had been a part of our family for so long. Our family. Patricia said our family. She said she wanted to remind me that whatever was in that will, family comes first, and Esther would have wanted them all taken care of. She said, "Derek has some things he's dealing with financially, and Cynthia's been through a lot this year. And I think Esther would have understood that the people who were closest to her are the ones who need support right now." I said, "What kind of support are you thinking, Patricia?" She said, "Well, we thought if there's a house involved, for instance, it would make more sense to liquidate it together as a family rather than." I said, "Who is we in that sentence?" She paused. I let the pause sit there. She said, "All of us, Miriam. We've all talked about it." I said, "What's the address of the house you're thinking of liquidating, Patricia?" Another pause. Longer. I said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and I ended the call. I wrote down the time, 7:15 p.m. I wrote down every word of what she had said. I put it in the October 27th folder. Then I called Rosalind Chun and said, "Send the letters." The letters went to Derek and Cynthia and Patricia by 9 p.m. They were short letters. They said only that I had retained legal representation, and that any further communication regarding the estate of Esther Calloway should go through my attorney's office. Derek called me twice. I did not answer. Cynthia sent a text at 11:30 p.m. that said, "Why are you doing this to this family?" I screenshotted it. I put it in the folder. I went to bed at midnight. I slept 6 hours. I woke up and put on the gray suit I wear when I'm presenting findings to a board. I made coffee. I put the folder, the physical one printed and tabbed, into my briefcase. I drove Ruben's truck to the attorney's office. The conference room at Joanna Farrell's office had a long table, 8 chairs, and one window that looked out onto a parking garage. Patricia, Derek, and Cynthia were already seated when Rosalind and I arrived. Patricia's expression when she saw Rosalind was the expression of someone who has stepped on something sharp and is trying to decide whether to acknowledge it. Derek looked at my briefcase. Joanna Farrell opened with the formalities. She stated the date, October 27th, and the names of the interested parties, and said she would read the will in full before entertaining any questions. The will was 16 pages. I will not read you all of it. Here is what mattered. Esther Calloway's estate had a total value of approximately $847,000. This included the house on Meridian Street, 2 investment accounts, a life insurance policy, and a small trust that had been established in 2009. The trust, established in 2009, named one beneficiary, Miriam Eleanor Calloway. Not the Whitmore family. Not Gerald and Patricia. Not Derek. Not Cynthia. Me. The trust had been accumulating for 14 years. Its current value was $312,000. The house on Meridian Street, the house Patricia had discussed liquidating as a family, had been deeded to me by recorded instrument in August of this year, 2 months before Esther died. The deed had been filed with the county recorder's office on August 14th. It was already mine. Had been mine for 2.5 months. Patricia had been discussing selling a house that was already in my name. Derek made a sound that was not quite a word. Patricia's hands, which had been folded on the table, went flat. Joanna Farrell finished reading. She asked if there were questions. Patricia said, "There has to be a mistake." Joanna Farrell said there was no mistake. Cynthia said, "She wouldn't do this. Esther was part of this family." I opened my briefcase. I said, "May I have a moment?" Joanna Farrell looked at me and said, "Of course." I took out the first document and laid it on the table. I said, "This is the deed to 1418 Meridian Street. Filed August 14th. My name is on line 7. I took out the second document. I said, "This is Ruben Morales's written account of what he found when he inspected my brake line on October 25th. I've also printed the 6 photographs he witnessed me take." I laid all 7 pages flat. Patricia said, "What is this?" It was not a question. I said, "I've also filed a police report. Case number 2024 to 10,847. It was filed on October 26th at 2 p.m. Derek stood up. He said, "You can't, that has nothing to do with." Rosalind said quietly, "Sir, sit down." He sat down. I took out the third document. I said, "This is a letter my grandmother wrote me 6 weeks before she died." I did not read all of it. I turned to the last page, to the paragraph I had read 40 times, and I read one sentence aloud. I read, "You were always mine." I just needed time to make the law agree with what I already knew. I put the letter back in the folder. The room was very quiet. Cynthia was crying. Not loudly, small controlled tears that she kept pressing away with one finger. I looked at her for a moment. She had not come to the hospital. She had not come once. But she was crying now, and I think she was crying for real, and I noted that without letting it change anything. Patricia was not crying. Patricia was looking at the photographs of the brake line. Derek was looking at the table. I closed the folder. I said, "I grew up in your house. I made sure your mother's last days were not spent alone. I sat at that table for 30 years eating Sunday dinner, and I never once asked for anything that wasn't already mine." I picked up my briefcase. "The police report is filed. My attorney will be in touch regarding any further contact." I looked at Patricia one last time. She was still looking at the photographs. I walked out. Here is what happened after. The police investigation into the brake line took 4 months. Derek was named a person of interest. The case did not result in charges. The evidence was circumstantial, and the DA declined to prosecute. I understood that. Forensic accountants know the difference between what you can prove and what you know. I know what I know. Derek and his girlfriend separated in the spring. I am told he is working in insurance now. I did not look into this deliberately. I heard it. Cynthia sent me a letter in January. It was 3 paragraphs. She said she was sorry she hadn't come to the hospital. She said she hadn't known how sick Esther really was, which was not true, because I had texted all of them on October 10th with the hospice assessment. But I understood that this was her version and she needed it. I did not respond to the letter. Kept it. Patricia hired an attorney and filed a challenge to the trust on the grounds of undue influence. The challenge was dismissed in March. The trust distributions were released to me in April. The house on Meridian Street is mine. I went there the week after the will reading, with the key that Esther had mailed me in August along with a note that said only, "The ficus by the kitchen window needs water on Thursdays." The ficus was still there. It needed water. I watered it. With a portion of the trust distribution, I established a small scholarship at the community college Esther had attended in 1962, one she had been forced to leave after a single year because her family couldn't maintain the cost. The scholarship is for adult women returning to school after an interruption. Covers 1 year of tuition. It is called the Esther Calloway Continuation Award. The first recipient was named in May. The folder labeled October 27th is still on my desktop. I have not deleted it. I open it sometimes not to relive anything but because I am a person who counts things and those documents are the count of what happened. The photograph of Esther's hand in mine is framed now. It sits on the yellow Formica table, which I moved from her kitchen to mine. Timestamp: October 14th, 11:52 p.m. 14 minutes before midnight. 14 years since she sat at that table and told me the law would catch up with what she already knew. Caught up. My family spent 30 years assuming that calm was the same as unaware. That patience meant I had nothing to offer but patience. That because I had never once raised my voice, I had nothing to say. They were wrong about all of it. The thing about a balance ledger is this. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't tell you it's coming. It simply arrives one morning, accurate and final, and there is nothing left to argue with. Esther knew that. She taught me in her way. The debt is settled. What I carry now is not what I was handed at 6 years old in a narrow room at the end of a hallway. What I carry now is a deed, a scholarship, and a ficus that gets watered on Thursdays. That's enough. If this story reminded you that calm is not the same as weak, that patience is not the same as surrender, and that the people who show up quietly and stay longest are often the ones the paperwork was always meant to find, take that with you. Update what needs updating. Put your name on what's yours. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.